Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this BLEXIT Florida special. My name is Eris. I've been a member of BLEXIT Florida for almost a year now, and I've had a chance to meet some really amazing people, including the panelists that we have here today. And I'll let them go around and introduce themselves. We can start with you, T.
Hi, I'm T, or Tania Gorman. I am with BLEXIT Florida Chapter. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partnership.
I'm Elena. I am a new community leader with BLEXIT, and I'm in the Tampa area within Hillsborough County.
My name is Jaha Cummings. I'm on the councilman for the city of Punta Gorda and on the regional planning council for the 6 counties in that area.
I am Byron Donalds, member of Congress, Florida's 19th congressional district.
Hey, so thank you guys so much for coming out and joining in on this discussion. So as you all know, February is Black History Month, and BLEXIT, we want to celebrate by recognizing Black prosperity throughout history. So we want to start with the Reconstruction era. Let's talk about the state of Black America during that time. Were we prosperous? What was going on during that time? Because it was a challenging time. So what was the state of Black America? Anybody can start.
Oh, would you like to go?
I'll say a little something. I would say that as soon as pretty much the gates were open, when slavery was over, people went as fast as they could to get as much education as possible and to start as much business as possible. Within one generation, we had businesses up and people in school. Actually, colleges built within 1 decade. So it was a time in which we didn't have barriers to our imagination, that we actually saw what was possible, or, in our mind, and made it happen.
Nice, very nice.
I also think that during this time, African Americans, even though they encountered a lot of adversity, they were also encountering a lot of, they had the stick-to-itiveness, so to speak, to figure out how to build, how to create, how to manifest their own destiny. They knew what they had a direction they wanted to go into. They were building their homes. They were finding out that they wanted to learn how to read. They wanted to go forward, creating a new society for themselves and working to be prosperous. And that's what we saw despite some adversity. So I think that should be duly noted. And what the other side of the narrative that we always see is a lot of, talk about, we saw the rise of the Klan and all the other negative aspects. But I think this is a time we should also focus on what the community was actually doing for themselves and how we can emulate that going forward.
Right. Okay.
I think you make a good point because, in this time period, like it's been said, you had newly free men, if you will, who were really trying to do everything they could to, frankly, walk out the Declaration in their lives. And I think that, if the newly freed slaves were not being successful, you probably wouldn't have seen the rise of the Klan and they, like you saw. So it really speaks to the innovative talents and abilities of that first generation of freed slaves in the United States. The true desires to enter into economy, the things that they had learned even under subjugation here in the United States, that now they had the free ability to do and actually extend and try to create towns for themselves and enterprises for themselves. And that's what I'm saying, the point you made about the Klan and some of these other groups, they would not have manifested themselves probably if Black people at the time were just being completely unsuccessful. Absolutely. And just trying to go back to the plantation because they didn't know or see a pathway of how to actually make their lives prosperous under this newly fresh mantle of freedom. And so I think that it is the initial success of Black America, if you will, that you had, unfortunately, these hateful groups who were trying to bring them back under bondage.
And I think we need to note that, through this whole process, African Americans had the right to vote, own land. They were in the political processes. They were part of legislature. They were doing exactly their civic duty. They were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And they were, like you said, they were prospering at their life. So I think as we go through this conversation, that should be duly noted, and I think that should be more of a discussion now more than ever. And I think that discussion is never really brought up even as I was going through this myself, and I feel like I do a lot of research on my own, making my own, help assist in making this timeline. It's like, wow, this is a lot of stuff we don't learn in school in general. Even at the college level, we still don't dive into this stuff sometimes. And now we're talking about it now, and I think this is information that should go out to the community, because I don't think a lot of our minority community knows, and even the general public knows how good we were doing in the beginning of the 19th century.
In spite of everything that was, I don't mean to cut you
Oh,
off,
no, go
but
ahead,
in
go
spite
ahead.
of everything, all the challenges that were against Black America during that time.
Absolutely.
And kind of to touch on what you said, T, it is very much like a walk down. Looking over this is like a walk down history, walk down history lane, and a lot of stuff you didn't see in school. Some of it, might sound a little familiar here and there, but it's almost like it was like a blank slate in a way. And so a lot of the narratives that we hear today about, just groups being oppressed or, feeling sorry for themselves or whatnot, because there was so much it sounds like there was a lot of Black people with freedom were being empowered, so they didn't have to feel oppressed. It wasn't there, so that narrative that you're not going to make it with this freedom wasn't there, and so therefore they knew that they could do what they do, prosper, be successful, vote, all that kind of stuff.
Share something on Punta Gorda. During this time, Southwest Florida pretty much was wilderness, and people had to be pioneers to make it happen. And with that said, because of the environment, they actually had to collaborate. And so, like, our history in Punta Gorda is actually unique. We call it a unique sociology because it did not conform to those standards, because it was not practical to have this unity in the population. Actually, it was an African American survey team that actually brought the railroad from Bartow to Punta Gorda, which then enabled all that trade to become. So you had Henry Plant, you had Flagler, and they were competing. And actually, irony was Punta Gorda and Key West were the two biggest cities in Florida at that time. And this was a town that was initially 100% Black, and then it became about 50-50 towards around the establishment in 1887. But it was a town that during the middle of all this craziness was actually co-incorporated, African American and European American together. And also, right around the time of Plessy versus Ferguson, we actually had a Black postmaster. During the time, because the Black Republicans still kept their hold in that area. Also, we had a man named George Brown who actually he had a shipyard who converted steamboats to sailboats back and forth. His company was one of the most profitable shipyards in Florida, but also was Florida's first equal opportunity employer, as well as he was the wealthiest man in Punta Gorda until the 40s. And actually was the land who actually sold the land to the county to establish Charlotte County. And this was actually our normal. People were voting the entire time. They were doing business the entire time. There was not, like, in terms of our imagination, we were able to create the world we wanted to. And so again, that's part of it, is that these limitations are things that are, you've either bought into or been told to us, but nonetheless, they are not true, because during the worst of times, we were able to thrive.
Right. I'm able to read some of Booker T. Washington's writings, and he was about, I think, 13 or 14 years old when the slaves were freed. So he writes very vividly, and he said he remembers as he stood beneath the porch when his master told him that they were freed, and he said, the feeling was that I remember that day I knew that we were in the best position we could have been in as freed slaves, with nothing to our name, not knowing how to read and write, but we were free. That's so profound, because today we're saying we're oppressed with all the opportunities that are given to us, but we have a slave who was standing there being freed and saying that was the best opportunity given to him. So I think when we put things in context, we should really look at it. Somebody's telling you, from history, saying they were in true oppression. They knew what it was like to have shackles on their feet. They knew what it was like to have a master above them. And they're telling you, no, I know what oppression is, and we're in a better state now than we've ever been. And so I think we need to refocus what we're saying in the narrative today and have a different discussion what oppression truly is, because I think we're getting a little bit off track, and we need to bring this back in to have a better discussion about what oppression is. And Reconstruction, to me, we should be emulating what our ancestors did then, now, to support the Black community going forward.
Right, I agree. And so tell me what you guys think about separate but equal. So during that time, how was the state of Black America during that time where with everyone being segregated, was that a good thing? Do you think it was a good thing for Black America at that time, or do you think that that they weren't able to really be free, still be free? You know what I mean?
I almost feel like that, because you touched on the collabing, the unity, and you had an area that was almost 100% Black, and then you had other cultures coming in. So I almost feel like, once the people that wanted to bring badness or didn't want to see, free man prospering, this was their way of okay, well, now how can we shut them down? How can we shut down this unity, this collabing, the people coming together, no matter what they look like, to work together and everyone be successful? That makes sense.
One thing in regard to this, when I mentioned about Punta Gorda, and by the time it was established in 1987, it was probably about 50-50. People could have gone sideways, but Black people were essential to the economy. And part of me saying this is that part of it, the goal has to be not simply be employed or have a little job, it's really have to be modes of production. Like the guy I mentioned, George Brown, why he was able to persist was because if he was not operating, there would be no unemployed. Like during the Great Depression in Punta Gorda, people had jobs because George Brown's factory was open. And so it's one of those things where, to some degree, if we achieve to those levels we used to achieve, there's some degree of security in being essential to the economy. I think, that's just being on a practical level. I mean, if you're easily hunted, you can be hunted. But if you actually are necessary for everyone's life, then everyone's going to think twice about, do I want to mess this up? Because if I cut this off. Because something happened, Wilmington, North Carolina, they had a situation where they had unity, things were going well, then people got upset, burned everything down, ran everyone out. Wilmington ended. We don't hear about Wilmington. Wilmington was one of the most prosperous communities in America, and it's been like exactly where it was when it ended, like 80 years ago, 100 years ago. It's been exactly what it is because it killed, the goose that laid the golden egg. And so part of that for us, if our aspirations are a little bit more to achieve our full potential, we're less likely to lose that position because we're essential to the equation. If we're not essential, then yes, we can very, very easily displace because we're not essential. It doesn't matter.
I think separate but equal was disastrous. It was a disastrous point for the country because, there are those definite points in American history that do exist post-Reconstruction where you had communities where Black people and white people were actually beginning to thrive and engage. I mean, the word mulatto is not something that's brand new. That word actually comes from the late 1600s, where you had points in American history, even pre-Reconstruction, where you had a mixing of the races. I think that, if you look back at that time period, late 1800s into early 1900s, there was a definite fear amongst the political class, and in a lot of respects amongst the economic class. Those who started to see and realize that if there was not this segregation, if you will, of Black people away from white society, that the political class and the economic class was going to start losing their authority in what was becoming America at the turn of the century. And so it is one of the worst tragedies in our history, even though slavery is probably the biggest thing in our history, without question, that policies and decisions like Plessy versus Ferguson were allowed to matriculate through the Supreme Court, through the High Court. And I think how it's interesting today is that I think that the conservative mind looks at the Supreme Court always from a skeptical perspective, because we don't just look at Brown versus Board of Ed, we also look at Plessy versus Ferguson and understand that you had the same institution rule come two different ways. And so it's really about the people that are sitting on the bench as opposed to the bench itself. And at that time, the dangerous thing that ever happened to our country was rulings like Plessy versus Ferguson, because frankly, what it did, it allowed for the continued perversion of laws on the books in too many states that allowed for the marginalization of black people in America. So it was a terrible time. We're just fortunate we were able to reverse that time, but it was not without a lot of bloodshed that unfortunately befell black people here in the United States, and also in Florida. I mean, Florida has a very strong history with that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I ask that because I hear black people say a lot of times that that it would be better if it was separate, still equal, but
I was going to jump in,
separate.
but T got something to say. I was going to jump in on you, but I'm going to let you handle it. Go ahead. I heard it out the corner of my ear. So you
And it's funny because when you said it, I'm like, I think I know where she's going with this because I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Oh, it would be better if we were separate and we need our separate spaces. This is the new trending thing now on campuses. We need safe spaces. We need our own places. And I'm like, so we've worked this hard and did the Civil Rights Act to get to this point because. And I don't know where they're going with that because Martin Luther King had a dream for what all of us to be together under one roof, to come together so our children could play. And it's like we're regressing, and I'm not understanding why are we going for that maneuver. So it's very unfortunate that we're thinking about this concept because when Plessy versus Ferguson happened, it took 50 years until the Civil Rights Act came along to undo Plessy versus Ferguson. See, we don't think about when we enact these laws how long it takes for something else to come behind it to undo that.
Right.
And that's the problem. We're not thinking long term. We're not saying we, but the powers that be, when these laws get created, they're not thinking long term. And so I want to say prior to Plessy versus Ferguson was the Jim Crow laws that came into place too. So it was almost like, okay, let's put the attack out, right? Let's start the Jim Crow laws, the black codes. Let's do everything we can to thwart them in their progress. And that didn't work. So then now let's do the Plessy versus Ferguson, because that's what it was. It was the boil over of the Jim Crow laws with the train. Was it Plessy riding the train? And he wasn't supposed to be, wasn't in the right train car because of his color. So it was the boil over of the black codes now that we have this court case, so let's really put them in their place kind of thing. So I think that's the issue when we look at all of this, is that we, in the long run, it just impacts us so horribly, and we have to be very careful. And look where we are now. We're in a place now where we're talking about, oh, let's go back to our own places and spaces. And I'm like, well, what was the whole purpose of doing all this 150 years ago? So I just think we have to be careful.
No, I agree with you. I had a conversation with my sister. It was during last summer's rights. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, we actually talked for about 4 hours just about everything. And she was just like, Byron, aren't you upset about this? I was like, of course I'm upset about this. I'm like, it doesn't really matter what your perspective is on how the interaction between the Minneapolis police and George Floyd started. What we all can agree on is that there are certain things that are just completely unacceptable. That should not have happened. I said, so don't get me wrong, I'm just as upset. And she said, I just think that things were better how they used to be. And it's worse for us now. She's like, and then what she said was, I feel it's worse for us now. Yeah. And I said, well, stop. Do you know or do you feel?
Right.
And she's like, I feel. And I say, well, feelings are subjective, and feelings actually tend to lead you down the wrong road. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about context. Like, do you actually understand the context of American history and the progression of the black experience? And she was just like, I've studied it too, but I'm just telling you what I see around me and what I feel about those things. And then I asked her, I said, do you know about the 1920 Ocoee riots? The race riots in Ocoee, Florida. I said, do you know about this? And she was like, no. And I was explaining to her about the race riots in Ocoee, Florida that occurred because a black man went to vote and the local Klan blocked him from voting. And what ensued were 4 days of race riots right here in Ocoee, Florida, not far from where we're sitting right now. Right, yeah. And so giving her that context, I said, I don't know about you, but there's no possible way that 1920 America was better for black people than 2020 America.
Right.
Like under no measure
Right.
that exists on anywhere on the face of God's green earth
No.
was it a better experience for black people in America 100 years ago versus today. But unfortunately, people are taking out of, they don't have the context of where we are in the progression. That's probably the last time I'll use the word progressive. But in the progression of America.
Right.
That's right.
And they don't really understand the context of that, and they're not understanding how to put their place where they are today with injustices that do happen in the context of where the country is, and truly how pervasive and systematic, which is a word that loves to get thrown out today, and how systematic it used to be. And I think, to your point, when you're talking about separate but equal is equal, when you're talking about the black coach, you're talking about Jim Crow, that was the systematic racism and oppression of black people in America. That's what it was right there. That's what and if you understand the history and get out your feelings, I know that's harsh for the people watching, but I'm just being honest. Then you truly understand where we are in the black experience today in America.
See, one thing also with this is that there's a degree of, I don't even know what to say. If one wants to say, let's go back to those days, then that means we got to also go back to our period of agency and where we were really at our best. We're at a time now where we're actually the words we say about ourselves is we actually call ourselves disenfranchised people as a personal misnomer. They actually say the words and they immediately say, I don't have any power, nothing like that. And so you had all this terrorism and craziness going on, and people did not say that. They were like, no, I am powerful. Despite this madness, I'm making it happen. And so it's like, in some sense of we should have the days, because the thing when I hear people saying this, they're not even talking about the days of achievement. They're talking about some imaginary, I don't know what past they're talking about. But really, this was a time of terrorism that despite terrorism, people thrived. And if we were thinking about let's get back to our abilities to how we were then I can say, all right, let's return to that self. That self is able to persevere despite. But if it's not that, it's simply like, no, I'm going to buy into someone who's trying to play us. And I say this, I've been on nonprofit boards for 24 years. And something I noticed that when we'd have issues with our governance is when we needed to maintain a social problem to keep ourselves relevant, as opposed to making ourselves irrelevant. Our goal, like nonprofits or in the social service world, should be not to exist. Should be to eliminate barriers, not to keep ourselves perpetually going. And I see this trend we're going on now. It's like we want to actually name ourselves as these permanently disempowered people, which all it does is makes us marginal. It makes us mediocre, which means we never can escape from that box. As opposed to, if we're really going to say go back, then let's go back to ourself of who we really are, our shining selves.
That's a really good point.
And yes, I worked in non-for-profit for 5 years, and I can say it's like put me out of business, right? Like that should be the whole goal. And instead, all I saw was more money being funneled in and more disenfranchised people coming in. And I'm like, no, why are you back? And the recidivism of the clients coming through all the time, the same minority clients coming back through, and it was horrible. And we weren't really helping the way we should have been and getting men and women on their feet like we should have, and it was very disheartening. And I think that's the piece, and we're not rising above. And when you say pull yourself up by your bootstraps or hold yourself accountable, then we're the ones saying that that's bad. We should never tell them that they're the victim, and it's like, but why would you want to do that? We want to empower our people to rise above as our ancestors did through all the adversity, and we're not doing that. And going back to what you were saying in the about the was it 1900s, around that time, we had Rosewood, which is again not far from here, Levy County. And Rosewood was a black community that was prosperous. And as we know, Rosewood ended because of, we would say, white backlash, but unfortunately that's what happened during that time, if we could put things in context. But what Rosewood was Black prosperity. It wasn't, everybody focuses on how it ended. Nobody focuses on what was going on between there. Can we focus on what happened in Rosewood? Rosewood was a Black, prospering county where everybody was working. They had their own schools. They had their own stores. They had everything going for them in their own community, to the point where actually white and Black business owners were doing commerce. I mean, talk about that. I mean, that's amazing for that time. Yes, there was a casualties in that at the end of that process, but that happened then. Again, context, right? But we don't talk about what was happening in the middle. And you know what I don't understand too, it's like, yes, this is heartening, but we could have rebuilt, but I think, yes, when you go through something that traumatic, probably they were like, let's just move on. But you know what, I think we should always keep in mind that there's a lot of good that was happening. Also, Black Wall Street got bought up over the summer, and all I heard was, oh, the casualties, oh, it was so horrible, this, that, and the other, Juneteenth, and I heard nothing about the actual prosperity that happened on Black Wall Street. I'm like, does anybody really know what happened on Black Wall Street? Because all I hear is the casualty, the war, the bad white man, all that. It just kept replaying on the media, and I'm like, why are you guys not talking about the goodness of Black Wall Street? Black entrepreneurship? Why are we not talking about the golden age of Black business from 1900 to 1930? Why are we not talking about that stuff? Because Black people are actually owning their own business. I think that was the rise of the HSBCUs. I think that was also the rise of Black people making their own hair products. I think and I think their own
Banks,
cars,
hotels,
banks,
credit
hotels,
unions,
everything, food, everything was
Cars,
going on,
everything, yes.
and we totally missed that. And I don't understand why we continually allow the narrative to be placed when we should be creating our own narrative. And I will say this again, I don't care how many laws get passed by whichever political party is in, only we can internally fix what is going on in our community. We have to help assume the responsibility. All of us play a part, and we can have everybody else support us, but we have to come together and fix what's wrong with us. And no matter how many laws get passed, it doesn't matter. We have to support ourselves.
That's very true.
Well, and I feel like what this kind of, everything you guys have said kind of shows that, highlights the beast that we're dealing with, the faction, trying to remind us of all the casualties, all the, this is the reason why Black people can't perspire or whatnot. And so, like you said, pulling us all together, it's just a reminder that that's how consistent we have to be with our message, that Black people are strong. They've had, history is here, as you guys have all highlighted. It's right here. We just have to keep telling those stories. And if we're not going to be storytellers, then the history's not going to get told. So we've got to keep putting it out there, the truth, and sharing how Black people
There's an
do.
issue that's going to come up in our city shortly, and it has to deal with this. We have to be mindful, be aware of all helpers are not helpful.
That's a good one.
A whole list of
Yes, it's
politicians we're
true.
gonna go through right now,
we had
right.
no, not all helpers are helpful, but we in Punta Gorda, we had a very robust Black business district, and this robust Black business district was still booming until the 60s. In 1965, the Punta Gorda City Council decided it wanted to explore eliminating this district and replacing it with public housing. Despite every single home and everything being owned by the Black population, there was actually no need for this. No one asked for it. It went to the point where actually people went to D.C. At that point, they had a Black head of HUD, Robert Weaver, and begged him, please do not do this. Do not bring this help to us because we do not need it. We are a strong community. Well, what happened then? They forced this. Eminent domain, everything. Black business district that by the time I was a child, I saw the very end of our business district. It had nothing to do with lack of enterprise. It had to do with actually helpers coming to help us against our will. And then, ironically, that then harmed the entire city. To this point now, our city has 1/3 of the commercial revenues that it had like before Hurricane Charlie, because of the fact that when this part of the city was weakened, it weakened the entire downtown. And so we're at a point now where we really have to like get out of the way and let us get back to business, because we were harmed and now the entire city is harmed. That's part of what I'm saying is we were part of the mode of production. It wasn't recognized, but the city has not recovered from harming us. It harmed the entire city. And so we have to bring this back. But yes, again, not all helpers are helpful.
Well, and that's an
That's a
amazing
great point.
story.
It's so true.
I feel like that's an amazing story that, even just hearing that like, it's like a painting that, you guys are successful, but we're going to paint you to be very unsuccessful and you can't even take care of yourself. You need, housing assistance, and you said they didn't,
I also think sometimes the African American community has relied on the government to fix us in a way, and the policy will help us. And we see that right now, right? How many executive orders have been signed in the last how many ever days to fix us, inclusivity, and whatever else is happening? But it's like,
gonna fix us, by the way.
that's not gonna fix. And I don't know. I'm not sure how this is all working, but that's not gonna fix us. I'm not sure, but if somebody feels that's gonna fix you, but I guarantee you we'll be in the same space that we are now 4 or 8 years later, because like I said, we have to look within ourselves. And the Great Depression shortly falls right after this era.
Yeah.
And again, we strive through that. And the Black community relied heavily on the Black church, which again was another backbone to what we did. It was our place to go to speak and to get us to rally together. And they came up with the plan. We shop and we buy where we work. And so the money circulates in our community. They had a plan. This is our plan and this is what we're gonna go by. And they made it through the Great Depression while other communities were falling by the wayside. The suicide rate of the Great Depression was huge. Our community was chugging along, getting by. So, I think we have to look at this and go, okay, now we've been through how many years? At this point, what is this, like 1930s? 30 years of almost, 40 years of almost freedom, and we're doing great, right? We're cruising along, and nobody's giving us a handout. Nobody's coming in to help us. We're going through great adversity. We're having a lot of our towns being torched or burned, but we're still moving forward. And again, we're thriving.
You're saying something, it didn't correlate to right now, but that was the time of the Harlem Renaissance. That was literally our greatest time. Our greatest time of cultural creation was during the worst of time for the rest of America.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right, Harlem Renaissance. And that's another beautiful time in our history that we don't speak about. Why don't we speak about the good things that go on in our community? We should focus on, and even like Black History Month, Black Prosperity Month, I really like this because we focused on not only a couple different, we didn't just focus on, Booker T. Washington or this person or that person. Yeah, we focused on the entire community. And I think this was a really great way to show the African American community. And I don't think we do that enough. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit. And I think moving forward, I think these should be bigger and broader discussions because I think the information needs to get back to the community.
Well, I think in part the reason, your last point though, I think why that happens is still somewhat out of the teachings of W.E.B. Du Bois with the talented 10th. See, with that mindset, it was as long as we have somebody going, that means we're all successful. And I think sometimes we get focused into that. We say, well, they did it, so that means that as a community, we're all successful. Until you look around and you say, well, wait a minute, where's my success in this situation? And so I agree with what you're saying. We have to begin to highlight all Black success, not just some Black success, or I'm gonna say it, not just some Black political success. We gotta celebrate all Black success. Because when you do that, actually what it does, it shows our young kids and even our contemporaries like, man, wait a minute. T did that. I know we can make this happen. But I think what you're starting to see, I've been saying this for a while with friends, and I don't want to jump ahead because we have a whole agenda of things to get to. But if you
Just go with it.
if you look at America today, we as Black America are in our second renaissance, if you will.
Yeah.
We really are today.
Yeah.
Whether it's entertainment, athletics, culture, music, business, politics, whatever the case might be, there is a more widespread and diverse thriving of Black America in America today, and that's not stopping. That's only going to continue. And I think when you have these situations, especially what happened last summer, we lose sight of that. And we think that, because of what the news is showing me second after second after second in a 24-hour cycle, that's indicative of what the country is, as opposed to seeing the successes all around us and really having that come to the fore.
And
I wonder why that's highlighted more than, our successes and our, everything that we have done and created. Why do we focus so much on the negative?
There's a lot of money in poverty.
Yes.
See, seriously, there's a lot of money in maintaining poverty.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not empowering people.
That's what America almost runs on now is poor people, and a lot of the events we've talked about are almost like what we're seeing today. It's they've created this COVID thing, and it's it's draining everybody. It's draining businesses. It's draining communities. It's draining mental health, and so it's just like the same equation, but just applying it in different time periods. And so you see success, and then they try to tear it down. You see people coming together, they're trying to tear it down, and that's pretty easy when you're a bad guy. You don't want to see positive, good things.
Think about this. We actually, going on that note, we've determined that probably 60% of our population is not essential. We actually have made this
Right,
in our minds
right.
that these are no longer essential, and then we can just, I guess, automate away, and it just, I don't know what y'all
And
gonna
what's
do.
essential to you is not going to be essential to
Essential to
me
me,
or
right.
her or anyone else.
It's amazing.
And exactly, it's like everyone's essential. Just essential to me is different than essential to someone else.
I think also too, with why does the negativity sells quicker than the positivity, right?
Sure does.
And I've been, my husband and I talk about this all the time. He's tired of me talking about this quite because we talk about it so much, but we talk about it because in terms of we're in an interracial marriage, so we talk about it all the time because we talk about this Black experience, and for some reason the Black experience gets equated with you have to grow up in the hood and you have to grow up in this kind of way, and if you don't, then you're Uncle Tom, and it gets all weird in that way, and it's like everybody has this certain way they think about this experience, and so if you're not aligned with a certain way of thinking or been through this path, then it gets very misconstrued, and that's kind of what happened over the summer. Everybody was labeled, right? And if you were white, you were racist. If you were black, if you were a Black Democrat, you were this. If you were a Black Republican, you were this. If you were white liberal, you were this. It was just getting all weird this summer. And so one side was selling this and the other side was selling that, and it was kind of crazy. And so at the end of the day, it was like, no, we're not all in these little boxes. We're human beings. Mm-hmm. We all have different trains of thoughts, and that's okay, right? And that's okay to think differently than anybody else. And so, and I think that's where we get lost. And so when we look at things like slavery and the context of all of that went on, that's a part of American history. And I tell people this all the time, slavery didn't just happen in a vacuum over here. Slavery is a part of American history. And so when we look at that, that's how we should talk about it. We shouldn't have African American History Month. That's a part of our history. Everything has been so separated and segregated that now we're putting everything into little boxes and labels to the point where you can't even say certain words like I'm American, or I support the flag, or I want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's like we're putting ourselves in these spaces and places, and now we're just divided.
It's easy to marginalize individuals if everybody has to be in a neat, tidy little box.
Yeah.
Then it's easy to marginalize people. To your point, why we always look at the negativity as opposed to what's positive.
Right.
Even though the positivity is all around us every single day. We walk down the street, we go to the supermarket, we're in our careers, our kids are in their schools. The positivity surrounds us. But what we get focused on are the points in time and the points in our community that are either highly negative or highly divisive. And the reason why that's the focus is because once I got you focused on something negative, and if everybody wants to focus on something negative, or let me not say everybody, if 20% of the population wants to focus on something negative, then I can put 40% of the population into this box who could maybe identify with the negativity, even though they don't follow the negativity. And then once I can do that, I can be your leader. I can have you watch my show. I can have you listen to my music. I can have you watch my movies. Or I can have you come to my nonprofit group and you will stand with me and you will buy my merch on the internet and do those types of things. And that's
marketing.
So, but in all honesty, it was said earlier about nonprofits. I served in state government before I went to serve in Washington. Whether it's Florida or whether it's Washington, the hardest thing to do is unwind some group getting money out of the state budget or the federal budget. Because the groups have within them whatever their mission is, and so for them the mission is never over. There's nothing in it for the group to end the mission. It's the continuation of that mission. And so you can't highlight the positive things that are going on. Now listen, I'm not trying to sugarcoat everything. I mean, is there plight in America? Yes. Is there poverty in America? Absolutely. Are things fair in America? No. Life's not fair. I don't know what to tell you. Life's not fair. But the reason we focus on these negativities is because once people get off of who they are as an individual and their abilities as an individual, and they get put into the mindset of, I'm just a black man in America.
You're part of the group.
So my plight is black people in America. Then once that happens, I lose sight of the actual positivity and the progress I can make in my life or in my family's life, or people in my community do with me all the time, and I get off of that, and that's why there's so much focus on the negativity. Then, frankly, if you were going to actually put on a scale the negativity versus the positivity in America today, I mean, it's like this. There's so many positive things happening in the lives of people every single day, even in spite of their poverty, or maybe the lack of certain opportunities that other segments of the population have. Even in that, there are so many positive aspects going on.
One thing, this goes to our values, and I just say, we're talking about black and African values. From our beginning, we exist on earth because the Creator gave us gifts that are supposed to be fully expressed. That's why we're here. And so when we let these arbitrary constructs get in the way, pretty much of our divine purpose to become our best, we're spitting in the face of the Creator, because we're actually saying that whoever this idol is I'm worshiping, this person who's the define me and who I've decided to buy into, they're worth more than actually the gifts and the purpose of me to exist. Secondly, anything you put after I am becomes true. If I am great, I'm the best, or you can say I am marginalized person. That'll be what you are, because the deal is our whole life is nothing more than imagination. It's visualization. Is that, a child, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. If they really keep to that, they will become an astronaut, but they got to hold to it, because when they get older, they realize I got to make these particular choices to get to that door, to get to that door, to get to that door. And that's actually how life's done. Life's done through, it's actually a spiritual exercise of visualization. And so if all of a sudden I just call my own life and say I am this, and the box I live in is this much, and I let some people trick me into believing that my limitations are here. What I've done now is I've eliminated myself from the pool of actually competition. As much as we say we're about capitalism and competing, remember not, if I can get you to self-defeat yourself and not even be in the game to compete, you're out. And that's one of the best rules. My family's been in Florida 8 generations, so I know a little bit about the country. Rule 1 of hunting is you separate individuals from the crowd. So if I can get you to be by yourself, to have no gratitude, to not appreciate anything in your life and just feel, woe is me, I now got you. You're separated from the crowd, and I can hunt you. And that's actually what happens. Anytime we take on this mindset of not understanding our value. And see, when I exercise my value, I see your value, because now my value system is one where I see the gifts in others. And that's where our collaborations and our network comes from, is that I'm beautiful, you're beautiful, let's make something beautiful together. But if I'm nothing, you're nothing, we're all nothing, we're just a bunch of nothings out here, easily hunted and easily taken out.
Well, and I think what both you all said plays on the groupthink mentality. And right now it's groupthink, it's cancel culture, and again, when you put everyone in the same box, it's easier to convince everyone that you are weak or you're not good enough, and people will try to do better.
Have y'all seen that movie? Her name is Temple Grandin. She's a woman that she's a woman. She's a professor. She has autism, and she's considered like the animal whisperer. She designs animal, what do you call it, slaughterhouses and things. It's interesting because I've actually used her story with kids sometimes, where like literally, I mean, she couldn't even hold herself together. She literally had to create a contraption to hold herself inside her body just from tripping off of sensations. But the point was, she recognized her value, her gifts, and every problem she faced was a door to something else. Any adversity she saw was not like, oh my God, this is an affirmation of my destruction or my lack of anything. It's, okay, well, I'm gonna get better at this because I've got to learn this skill here because I see now this is a barrier. And her deal was like, if there's a wall there, I just go around it, or I'll create a whole new building. And see, we used to do that. When I was a child, I used to remember, as a black child, that black people turn dust into gold. I used to know that whatever it was, you can have like a Pinto, and make that car into like a beautiful ride. And I'm talking, or you could just take a raggedy something and put a little something on it. And honestly, the day I saw us going off a cliff, it may be a small thing in middle school, when I start seeing us wearing other men's names on their back, and start all dressed the same, and start doing our individual, having our individual creativity. I said, all right, now we're starting to go into the groupthink of nonsense, because that's what makes it dynamic, is that we touch something and it becomes golden. And so when we realize we don't think we have the gold in our hands, what are we?
You're controllable.
All right. Yeah, and I think that's kind of been the issue going through the last 50 years. It's like, when do we reassert our control back into our community and start moving forward? And I think, the first 50 years after slavery, showed us, if anything, that we were prosperous. We could make it. I mean, leading up to the 1940s and 50s, black men were getting off the farm work. They were going into non-farm work. They were actually catching up, making almost half the amount of money that white men were making. They were making better changes for their family. I mean, there was all sorts of dynamics happening that were increasing their wealth and their prosperity. So it just goes to show you that things were changing. And
how was unemployment during that time? Like, you said it was about equal?
Yeah. Black unemployment in the 40s, they were actually, I think they almost, if not equal, at the black working rate was almost, if not higher, slightly higher. Wow. Yeah.
But entrepreneurship also was a value at that point as well.
Yeah.
And it's interesting on that note, like, spent some time in Africa as well, and noticed that there's so many businesses. And then especially for black women, you're looking at the most female-owned businesses per capita in the world are in Ghana, because trade is our culture. And for us that's the irony of this, we are creating people. We create, we cultivate whatever skill set we have, and we make that into a trade. That is what we do. And so when we're not doing that, then we're doing something else. And that's the thing. We are people who are supposed to create our own jobs. And so the fact that we're waiting for someone to give us a job, this is problematic. It is very anti who we actually are as a people.
Mm-hmm. Right. Wow. And the birth rates were actually higher than for blacks over whites. So think of our birth rates now, where we only make up 13% of the population. Imagine if we kept up our birth rates.
Yeah.
Or would we be now 30 to 40% of the population, maybe?
Very true.
There's force in numbers.
Well, and
This is just science. This is facts. This isn't feelings. This is facts. I know. And I mean, you can feel whatever sentiment about abortion or the Chicago shootings, but at the end of the day, when there's more of us in numbers, and there was more of us then, clearly, we were doing bigger and better things. And I think that is a huge part of who we are. Like, you know, giving birth, being a mother, that's a great gift as well. And I'm sorry, but this is just simple science and facts. Like, when there's more of you, you do more things, and there's an army. And if we were having higher birth rates in the 1940s and 50s, that should tell you it all right there. And now we're even lower than before. I mean, if we keep on this rate, we're going to be what? The census actually comes out, I think, at the end of, if not this, hopefully, if it doesn't get tied up in the White House.
March.
End of March, right? We should have the numbers here very soon. It's going to be really interesting to see that data, what percent of the population we are, because that'll tell you a lot. If we've dropped, we're in trouble.
Well, and I feel like that goes to show what was happening inside the family, because if more black families were having more kids than white families, that means, to me, in my head, that, you know, more black couples were staying together, creating the family, the nuclear family, as we've seen be destroyed within the black community as well. So I think that's plays on the family dynamic as well, and how that's been targeted throughout history in the black community.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to bring up. I think the family structure, families being together, is huge, and I think we should absolutely be preaching more of that. Marriage and the family dynamic, children being together with their parents, a lot of that has gone away, and a great decline at that.
Well, and thinking about how you said they came into the one community and forced, you know, public housing, you can see how they most likely came into the homes and forced the mother and father apart. You know, all these socialist programs that we now know, you can see how it divided.